that we made to everybody. We made it to our students and to our faculty. We would come back to you and we would show you what the data actually looks like. So we proposed the idea of a name change. We didn't really know what the name change, what we should change to exactly. The data helps define that fairly clearly. And what you'll see here is what are the impacts long-term for the university by doing this? What's the rationale for it? So I'll just go down through the PowerPoint and try to go relatively quickly, try to minimize questions if I can at first, but if something comes up, you absolutely have to ask a question at that point, feel free. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a quick look. Reasons for the name change. There are a lot of sort of what I call smaller or medium-sized reasons for name change. One is that we're not, strangely enough, a number of people don't know we're actually a University of Maine system school. I have a number of people, including the teenage children of a faculty member last night said, but they'll think that we're part of the UMaine system if we do that. And both of the teenagers' parents said, you do know we work for the UMaine system, right? So there is that little confusion. If you're born in Maine like I am and grew up in the area, it's hard to believe, but there is that confusion. Secondly, our law school in connection to the law school is a little ambiguous. We actually are the host of the law school, so it's good for us to be clear, to have a name that aligns better with them. We also have been confused many times with the community college, which is, I am a big fan of the community colleges, but we obviously are bringing a different service, a different product to the world. So our goal is to be clear where we are versus the community college. And finally, if you ever log in usm.edu, forever in perpetuity, you will have up on your Google site the University of Southern Mississippi, not us. So the domain name is important, but those are relatively minor compared to the next slide. If you were going to say, I'd like to be a college president in America, pick the state, and you looked at this slide, you would say Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont would be the worst place in terms of college-age students. The decline, as you can see from this chart, about over the next 10 years, significant. We'll show you some other slides as well. On the back of that presentation, it shows just in Cumberland County that if we have no in-migration of individuals just in Cumberland County by the year 2034, we'll be down almost 14 or 15,000 students. Excuse me for a second. And so we would have a significant impact just in if we had reduced our migration issues significant. I've told the story many times, but when my cousin, who graduated from Morse High School a few years before myself, just retired from 41 years of teaching at Prescott High School in 1977 when she began, I asked her, what was the population of Prescott High School? And she said 1,200 students. What is it today? I asked when she retired last June. She said just over 500 students. She said that's the story of western, eastern, northern Maine. Our demographic decline is one of the most significant in the country, especially towards young people. So when we're thinking about this, the question isn't really, what about the name change that makes you, what's so significant about the name change? After all, we've had 6 name changes in the last 90 years, right? So it's not like we've had consistency in name. The question is, why are you doing it? And the number one reason is we don't actually have a business plan that's sustainable. We actually will be struggling with demographic decline for the next 10 years, and we have to do what we can to be as attractive, not just in these 2 or 3 counties where USM gets most of its students. We have to be across the state and across New England and really across the country. So let's take a look at that. What that means for us, by the way, is if we don't do that, we're going to end up in a situation where we're going to have less money for student aid and support. As you bring in more out-of-state students, it actually is directly helpful for our students, USM and Maine students. Why? Because we can use that money for scholarships and we can use that to sustain and provide financial resources that they otherwise wouldn't get. It's also for our faculty and staff, because without students, we have fewer staff, we'll have fewer faculty members, especially full-time tenure track, which is a pronounced part of our assets. And finally, we'll be at fewer upgrades that we can do to our campuses, and we just won't have the money to really thrive, and we believe that we're in a thriving place. So, our way out of this predicament will depend on our ability to recruit out-of-state students. Our largest located campus, obviously, is in Portland. By the way, almost 70% of our students are either on the Portland campus or online. Only about 30% are on the Gorham campus, and a sliver really are at the Lewiston-Auburn campus. Probably about 5 to 7% are in our Lewiston-Auburn campus. So when you talk about where are most of our students and what are they doing, they are right here already, or they're online, or primarily online. So what we found out is that, and this isn't surprising, I think, for those of us who have been around for a while, but Portland's a very attractive place. And this is where you see how attractive it is. We asked them, is it an interesting city? Does it attract young people? Is it appealing as a college town? Is it a great place to live? Does it have good opportunities for jobs? Look at those numbers. They either were agnostic, they didn't really know, they strongly agreed. The numbers are clearly in favor of agreeing at the interesting things to do. It attracts a lot of young people, very, very high. And those red are the only ones that people would say no. So even in the state of Maine, where you might think rural towns might have a negative view of Portland, it's actually extremely low. That is data both in-state and out-of-state. Next slide. What we found from an exhaustive research study is that out-of-state students, we did about 400 prospective students, 400 prospective parents, meaning that they're parents of prospective students, and about 100, just under 100 guidance counselors throughout New England. Now, I want to tell you, when we look at this data, that if we had a 15% move of the needle, I would have been impressed, and I still would have recommended that we think about a name change. We did not. We had about 4.5 times that. So we're going to take a look at what that data actually looked. It was much stronger than what I was expecting. So let's take a look. First of all, when you look at how familiar are you with the University of Southern Maine, one of our problems was, this may surprise those of us in York and Cumberland County, right? Because we're like, everybody knows USM. Wow, if you look out of state, the state students, only 15% said they had a really pretty solid knowledge of what USM is. And 30% said that they had some knowledge. And when you actually look at out-of-state guidance counselors, only 14% of New England guidance counselors had a handle on what USM is. And you'll see later, only 5% of all the people we surveyed out of state could even identify Gorham as a site of a campus at USM. So Gorham by itself is clearly not on the radar of most of our New England potential students. Pretty significant. If you look at how do you know where the University of Southern Maine is located, well, you can see right here, just what I was telling you. Out of state, only 5% could identify Gorham, and strangely enough, 45% identified Maine as being the place of Southern Maine. So they, I guess they were technically accurate. We still want those students, so that we need to educate them in geography. So you can see here, out of state versus in-state. Overall, Maine people tend to know us. And by the way, that's an important thing to recognize. What you're seeing is a lot of people who are saying, you don't need to change the name. It makes perfect sense to them because they're in this area. These three counties are pretty much where our alumni end up. So when you look at York, Cumberland, Androscoggin, a little bit of Saginaw County, most of our students stay in that area. Troy branched out, and he ended up going all the way up to Bangor. But most of us stay within 100 miles of this particular area. So next slide. The market research also showed a new name that clearly associates us with Portland, would significantly move the needle in attracting out of state. And this is where you get these are really significant data. This is what I was kind of foreshadowing before. If you look at, would a student visit the campus, would they consider looking at us, and would they attend? I was expecting a 15% needle move. You're talking about almost a 50 to 60% increase in numbers of students who would look at us, visit us, and attend if we change the name to University of Maine Portland. This is out-of-state students. I'm telling you, if there's one reason you're looking at the slide, this is significant. We were not expecting this. I mean, Nancy and I talked about this. We agreed that if it was 10 or 15%, we'd still move forward. We were never expecting 55% of students to say, oh, I'll come visit you if you call yourself University of Portland because I like Portland, I have a positive reaction to it, I'll go there. Likelihood of school counselors, this is even more significant. Now look at this on the out-of-state. If you combine the out-of-state, much more likely and somewhat likely, out-of-state is the green. Guidance counselors, as you know, play a key role in making a decision about whether to send a student or recommend a school and put a student in a particular place. 81% of out-of-state guidance counselors said, I would be more likely or much more likely to recommend your school if you changed your name to something like University of Maine at Portland. Why? Because they have a positive association with Portland, and because they know that we're definitively part of the University of Maine system. Very important stuff. At the same time, we are surveying prospective students, parents, etc. We also, of course, reached out here in the state. And this is where the data gets more mixed. And this is normal, by the way. I talked to several college presidents who told me, if you only get 2/3 of your alumni opposed, you'll be lucky. Because in most cases, in places like when St. Francis became UNE, 90% opposition, according to one administrator. They said at that time we had 300 to 400 students. Today we have 10,000. It was obviously the right move, but when we first recommended that we change our name and revitalize the whole university starting with a name change, the opposition was very high, very normal. By the way, but some of the opposition I find I smile a little bit at, in the sense they say, well, you know, we've always been this name. I'm thinking, no. When my grandmother graduated in 1927 from the Gorham Normal School, we've had 6 name changes in 90 years. So the answer is it's not exactly the same as Bowdoin or St. Paul's, where it's been the same for 250 years and nobody's ever touched the name. This is a change, but I would see us as a university that has evolved into itself. As we change our focus and we change we changed from being a teacher's college to being more of a well-rounded school with a lot more programs. We began to evolve in our name change, and I think that's what we're doing here. So when you look at the reactions here, faculty, interestingly enough, support this change. If you actually combine their 54% direct support and another 6% that say I'm not opposed, you've got 60% of the faculty in favor of a name change. Staff, a little bit more mixed. If you combine the at least not opposed, they're about equal, they're almost 50-50. And then students and alumni, again, students and alumni live in these 2 or 3 counties. So their world looks like, why would you bother to change? And understandable, they don't wake up every day and say, how's that university doing, what's happening in the future? I'm paid in part to look around the next corner. I'm paid to look at what is happening in the next 10 years that we need to be scared about. And when we are down now to about 36 births a day between now and tomorrow morning, right? So by tomorrow at 11, Maine will have about 36 births a day. To put that in somewhat of a perspective, the city of Houston, which is a little bit larger than the state of Maine, will have about 212 births in the next 24 hours. That's what we're living against, right? So if we could build a business plan on just these 3 counties, we'd do it. But as you can see, not possible, really. So while some concerns about name change is necessary to ensure the future of the university, I think that's a fair statement. I think we will end up in some of the crises, maybe not as dramatic as we had back in 2013-14, but I think that we'll end up back in a very difficult financial situation. I just tell you this. We had a 5% enrollment growth this fall. People said in northern New England, that's amazing, that's incredible. But when you unpack that, 2% of that was dual enrollment. That is, we're doing better at getting into high schools and teaching within the high schools. That's great, but it's not necessarily, those students aren't necessarily coming to us for 4 years. And secondly, we make no money on them. The other 2% is we're actually holding on to more students. We have a 7% increase in retention. That's great. We're holding on to our customers like we've never held on before. That means the university is improving. It's a more attractive place. Only 1% of that 5% growth was actually new students. And I'll tell you this, I believe, and there's some evidence of this, is that the outgoing president of UMaine Farmington said, over the last 4 years, I can tell you that about 4 years ago, we lost 15 students to USM as you got your act together. The next year we lost about 25, and the next year we lost about 40. That is, what's happening is we're cannibalizing our own students as opposed to growing new possibilities, and that is not, my goal is not to steal students from anybody else. My goal is to offer the best program, but to really do what's best for Maine, and this is part of what's really good for the state of Maine. So when we look at this, according to the data, a name change would significantly increase interest in USM. So we had 2 choices. When we went through this, we hired a consultant to help us to do the market research and a public relations firm, and they both said the same thing. They said you have 2 ways you could go. You could spend lots of dollars, millions of dollars over the next decade, really emphasizing that Portland is a major site for your university. and keep it the same name. But they said it would be a lot cheaper in the long run just to change your name, because people will immediately recognize it, and you've done all your marketing practically in the name itself that will draw them to the next level of understanding. Now, when they get into the internet and they start to really look at the data, they'll figure out, okay, so we have campuses in these 3 places, et cetera. But to draw their attention, it had to start there. So because of this, the data suggests that a name change makes sense. This is kind of what we're looking at, University of Maine at Portland, with Gorham, Lewiston, and online being the major entry areas. So anyway, this is a nutshell. The data was enormous. We're trying to distill what we think is the fairest representation, and I think that's probably, probably enough in terms of the larger research, but let me just talk to you. So the purpose of today's meeting is in part to just let you know what the outline is going to look like. We have a number of campus dialogues that we're planning now over the next 6 months, next 4 to 6 months. We will be meeting with students, faculty, et cetera. Now, you might say, well, have you already made up your mind? The data clearly leads us in a direction where we have to bring this to the Board of Trustees. The purpose of these forums is really important, though, because you can listen to people and you can, first of all, when people hear the data, a lot of people do shift their minds. I mean, they kind of say, oh, I kind of see where you're going, and I can see why this is helpful. Not everybody does, but even the people who have concerns, sometimes we can get to those concerns and we can mitigate some of them. So, for example, I met with the coaches, and the coaches of all our sports teams, and they had 2 immediate concerns. One was that they were concerned, would the NCAA World Series championships that we've had and basketball champions that we have, would they get obliterated because it would be an old name? And I said, no, we'll work with the NCAA to make sure that they clearly designate the original name plus the new name. We'll work with that. We'll try to get through that. The other concern that they had was, don't change the mascot and don't change the colors, because we really worked hard to get those colors. Absolutely, easy to do, so that reassurance helped them. So those are reasons why we want these forums, to really try to do the best we can to try to mitigate at least the pain and whatever. I'll finish by telling you that I did talk to Kate Foster, who left the University of Farmington, went down to a place called the College of New Jersey. And when she went to the College of New Jersey, she had gone through a major name change her predecessor had gone through a major name change. There used to be something called Trenton State. And they made that change, and it was a significant change, but they did it overnight. Now, she said it was a master stroke. They ended up moving into a whole new level of prominence and interest throughout New Jersey and the mid-Atlantic states. It absolutely revolutionized the college almost overnight. But the one thing that she didn't do, that she regretted, or not that she, but their predecessor said that he regretted, is that they did it in a last-minute board vote. They kept it quiet, and then they immediately changed all the signs almost over a weekend, and then it was done. And they thought that would be this way. It caused a lot of resentment. There are people who still think it was a good idea, who still have a lot of resentment about that process. So our goal for the next 6 months, before we bring it to the Board of Visitors and Board of Trustees, we want to have as many conversations, be as transparent as open. We'll certainly take a few punches here. People, change in New England is never an easy thing. But we believe in what we're doing. I think sometimes when you show people the data and you listen to them, it moves them, I think, in a good place. So that's kind of where we are. I just wanted to know maybe if Cliff or Tony wanted to add anything from a business perspective at all in terms of how you're thinking about this. Sure. Again, Cliff is the head of our Board of Visitors.
Thanks, Glenn. The perspective that I have is that, as you, I think, all know, the university system is trying to move to a one university system, and from my perspective anyways, we take advantage of the assets on each and every campus. This particular campus has a great asset. It's called the Greater Portland area. Job opportunities, internship opportunities, and the ability to track them out of state. So if we can do that, it's going to help the entire system. It's going to help the entire student body of the state of Maine. And I think from a business perspective, that will help us all. So that's why I support this.
Tony?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I would offer is this is really connecting the dots. What Glenn said about births in our region, they are far exceeded by deaths. We are in a death spiral. And unless we attract people to come to our region and to our state, it's going to be a bad outcome for all of us. So connecting the dots likewise means when we bring in people from out of state, it doesn't mean they're turning around and going home afterward. The internship opportunities and offerings that are available here are phenomenal. They're, in fact, one of the most robust that we have in the region. And that means it's a pre-hiring phase. And so an employer like MEMIC or others brings students in, and so we've got them for 6 months or a year to vet them and then hire them. And when they get hired, they stay. More importantly is they have families and they have kids, and we begin to grow again. And that's really what this is all about. This is a big piece of it, and the university is one of our greatest assets. So we need to support it, and I think this change is going to make a big difference in who we get to come, not just from around the country, but around the globe. We have something that is unique and wonderful here that we think that we can bring people from all across the world to enjoy what we already know is a great product.
Thanks. Thanks. So questions, comments, thoughts? We also have Amy Petrin, who's also on our board, and they were once known as she's the head of Ovations, and as she says, nobody can remember what they used to be named, but I'm sure that was a process as well. So Amy could certainly give you a perspective on any learnings that she had. She and I met the other day, and she gave me some great information about, how to go about this and how to talk about name change and what that means for the organization. So Amy would be glad to talk to you. Any questions?
I'm curious, you're going to have to get legislative approval for it, correct?
Yeah.
Do you have any, champions in the legislature at the moment that you think are going to work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Majority Leader in the Senate, Nate Libby, came out yesterday in the Portland Press Herald as saying that he supports this. He's also one of our MBA students. He thinks it's a more prestigious sounding degree. He said that's good. He said you're building on the assets that you naturally have. So not bad to have the Majority Leader in the Senate be supportive of that, is no question. I have had a conversation with John Diamond, who put in the original, not John Diamond, John Martin, who had put in the original legislation to name and put into statute all 7 colleges. It was a reaction to a former chancellor's perhaps overreach, and when he locked it in, he said he would sponsor the legislation. Now, whether he's still going to do that, I don't know, but that was about a year ago, and he said, yeah, when you're ready, just let me know, and I'll sponsor the legislation to change my own legislation. So I think we'll get supportive. I've talked to, we have a lot of support. I've talked to the 2 representatives in Gorham, Senator Sanborn, and Representative McLean, and both of them said, look, if it's the right thing to do and the data's behind you, I'll support you. So.
Also, I'm a little bit curious, what's the price tag expected on this?
Yeah, we don't know. We're trying to put that into perspective. I've said probably $750,000 is a minimum. Many people have said I think it's going to go even higher than that. So we don't actually know. We do know that uniforms would have to be done, signage would have to be done, and documents would have to be done. The stuff that you do with a bookstore, you can kind of change that overnight, right? You just call the companies and they simply change the graphic design. So I think it's not going to be inexpensive, but I'll tell you this. If you took 100 new students at $21,000 tuition, right now our in-state tuition is around $8,000. If you took 100 new students just in tuition, now if they're out of state, they're also going to buy our room and board. You're talking about paying it back in 1 year if you just use that money for that purpose. So 100 new students, which this marketing data shows you could do, would pay for the transition. It's also a one-time cost, which I really prefer. So if you have to take some money out of your savings account, that's the kind of thing you put into. You put that money into paying for it all at once and get it off your slate immediately. So it's from a financial point of view, it's not insignificant. I don't want to minimize that in any way. On the other hand, the return on that investment looks like it will be multiple. Yeah.
Would there be any? You say that you would hope or expect that it would bring in new out-of-state students. Would there be any immediate plan, or have you guys given thought to the idea of immediate expansion in order to accommodate for those students?
Right, so a good chance for us to brag a little bit about what the Maine voters did for us on November 6th. So many of you know that we're putting significant increases into the Gorham campus. It's very important that we emphasize that just because the name might start to draw people, Our Gorham campus is extremely important to us. We're putting on $7 million into renovations of dormitories and some improvements in what we call MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, is going on over there. And we're completely with a $2 million investment in the Brooks Dining Hall, so to making Gorham really much more attractive. But the major change or transformation that we're seeing in the overall campus will start right across the street from where you're sitting today. Where that parking lot is, that parking lot will go away, and that the new Student Success Center will be in the center of that, facing Bedford Street, creating a new quad. And Nancy Griffin will be the CEO and the COO that will be kind of quarterbacking that whole project. And she's working with a set of an RFP with a private company to put out an RFP for up to 600 beds for upperclassmen, so we don't want to hurt the Gorham campus. We want to keep the freshman, sophomore, and the Gorham campus. The upperclassmen and graduate students, up to 600 beds here on the Portland campus. So in many ways, we're starting to really put more muscle on what has traditionally been kind of a commuter campus, but in a really great location, now changing that into a more residential base. Nancy?
Just to add to that, so you have it, last week the FFT committee of the BOT passed and supported our master plan, and the master plan will be voted on by the Board of Trustees. I think it's January 27th. So in that master plan, which you can find on the President's webpage, there is talk about the expansion. The great news is because of the people in the state of Maine, we've gotten some funding and we've started that process. We have awarded and we'll be working with Brailsford and Dunlevy. They'll be our owner's representative for what will potentially be a public-private partnership residence hall, and we're moving on that aggressively and hope to have something either open for fall 21 or fall 22. So we're working on that. And again, we have projects on our Gorham campus that we're expanding, and we'll be doing a lot. We're renovating a residence hall. We're doing work in our existing Bailey Hall, which is our largest academic building out there right now. So we're getting primed for the increase and ready for the increase. We also have an RFP out for our parking garage and other things, because if you were to talk to our students, they would tell you one of the impacts of the growth of enrollment on our campuses is the fight for a parking spot. So that's the kind of, certainly the kind of problem that we wanted to have. I think it's also important for you to understand our demographics and to understand some of our populations. So if you were to look at the Lewiston campus, that Lewiston campus has about 400 students, or just under 400 students affiliated with that campus. If you look at the University of Maine Law School, which is the University of Southern Maine's entity, it sits on our campus, it is part of our community, it's part of USM. So we already have a constituent that has the University of Maine connected to it. They serve about 254 students. If you look at the Gorham campus, that campus houses just over 1,300 students in the residence halls right now, so right around that number. And the rest of our students are commuter students that really are utilizing the Portland campus heavily. And so this fall we were at 8,140 students. So it shows that primarily our students are utilizing and coming to USM to take courses on the Portland campus. So it makes sense for us to promote it and to showcase it more. And it certainly will have an impact with out-of-state students. We want to do better with out-of-state students. We have increased enrollment in out-of-state students as well as in-state students. That's part of that 1% growth that the President talked about. But we need to do more, and we need to pull more students from out-of-state here to Maine in order just to keep up with the workforce demands.
And one more, would this come with, and you may not be this far down the road, but would it come with a new, I would assume, the public relations plan? Would that cost you guys more in a sense of trying to get a newer name out there?
I think it will have an impact for marketing for sure, because once you make that name change, you're only going to be effective if you start pushing that out into New England. So that will be part of the cost, I think, of the change. There's no question. I'll leave that up to Bob, though. So. Amy, did you want to say anything about name change at Ovations?
I just know from our own experience how transformative it can be, and that if a name sticks, like I think this one will do, it's all the things you're talking about become in the rearview mirror, because you're just moving forward. The change and the pride, the change in how people feel about it, the change how people react inside and out. It's really strong. So I think it's a great move.
Thank you. I want to actually pick up on that because the discussion we've had today is a kind of a business-oriented discussion. It's about how do you make yourself attractive as an entity, as an organization. I want to say that, and again, I don't want this to come off in the wrong way, but there's a part of which we've kind of played small. And what I mean by that is that we've been kind of content to be a 2-county school in a relatively small and rural state. And I think that we can play bigger. I think that we can play even big. We've got one of the most attractive places in the world to be. We have one of the most vibrant economies for a small city in America. We have a safe place. We have a place that's doing culturally interesting things. And I think that we are now giving ourselves permission to play bigger, to think bigger, and to not just be content with being a regional small university, but to be a place where people across the country even would want to come, that would be proud to send their kids to. I think there is a psychological advantage as well as a business case here.
This is a little abstract, but I'm curious, we talked about the fact that you're partially addressing the fact that Maine has fewer and fewer people. How responsible do you feel personally as the head of an institution that would keep people here for that retention?
Yeah, you mean keeping, if they come here to make sure they graduate? We feel very responsible for this. This has been something that has challenged USM over the last few decades, quite frankly, and we are extremely pleased with the success we've been seeing. How did we do that? 3 simple ways we did that. We listened to the students and they gave us 3 pieces of advice. 1, make sure that somebody knows me, likes me, cares for me, directs my career here. I can't feel like a number. And so we've really changed a bunch of things in advising under Nancy's leadership and others to make that happen. Secondly, we've given them more money. As they said, we basically, you're not as affordable as you think, you should be getting better packages. And we started to put better packages on the ground and started to do that. And that helps with retention, because when a kid who's first generation, doesn't have a lot of money, parents have never been to college, and they get a bill for $1,300 that they weren't expecting, they freak out and often leave the school because they think, oh, college was never for me. So the money helps stabilize semester to semester their completion. And finally, they said, give us the added value of our education. Give us internships, experiences, job shadows, because we're coming to USM because you've got that surrounding you. And those 3 things have really, we've done a whole workforce development on that last piece that really helps get every program now has an internship that allows them to connect and get that added value. So that retention has gone up 7%. I can tell you as a college administrator, any college in America that improved retention by 7% would be, by 2%, quite frankly, would be excited. To go to 7% is a real testament to the work that our staff and our faculty have been doing over the last 4 years. They've really started to put students focused first. Our focus is on students above all else, and that has to be a continuing theme. So I do feel it enormous. It's probably the thing that I hate the most, because if you have students come here and lack of retention is the biggest concern, because they come here and they get debt and then they drop out. They're actually worse off when they've left you, right? Because now they don't have a job because they didn't get the degree. And on top of that, they're in a situation where they now have debt they have to pay back, but they don't have their degree. So getting them to go through and complete is a major piece. And that's why partly we're rebuilding the Portland campus, because we want those students to have a ability, even as juniors and seniors, to don't have to run into an apartment in Portland, pay too much, and maybe spend more than they should and drop out of college because they can't afford the tuition. So yeah, it weighs on our mind heavily. It's not directly related to this. This is more of an attraction piece. Once they get here, though, we think we'll be in a better position to do more retention.
And I would simply add to that all of us that work directly for President Cummings and are on the leadership team here do not feel that we work for USM or that we work for the University of Maine system. We feel like we work for the state. What we're doing is literally we're in many ways, we have to meet workforce demand. We have to help the state grow. It's part of our challenge. So we're deeply connected to the growth in Maine, and And what we're doing here and this simple name change opens up a stream for people to come to us. And we know from data that if students stay within a 75-mile radius of where they graduate from. So we certainly hope that by bringing more across the border, across the bridge, that they will stay here and work for Maine.
By the way, there's some research in higher education called the 70-70 rule, that 70% of college graduates stay within 70 miles of where they graduated from college. Not true on the very elite strata, so you might go out to Stanford and then come back to Maine or come back to the East Coast or whatever. But for the majority of college goers, they get their degree and they stay within 70 miles of where they got that degree. If that's true, that means that we have a 70% chance of every student who comes here staying here. And given the quality of this area, we think we have a real case to be made for its impact long term on Maine's economy, because we think that those students will come here for a variety of good reasons, stay here, maybe even marry here, and be here to add value to the economy. So if that statistic holds up here in this case, we'll actually definitively be able to show the Maine people that we're bringing people into the state of Maine.